Well, Charlie, firstly, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
There's been a lot of coverage of the recent changes to the UK listings rules and also the proposed further changes by the FCA across capital markets. Can you talk a bit more about what those changes are and also what more is to come?
Yeah, I think it's a hugely exciting time at the moment in the UK capital markets. There's been a real recognition by the government of the role that capital markets have to play, both in growing the domestic UK economy, but also ensuring London's position as a global financial centre. And so what's been going on at the moment is essentially the biggest review and reform of the UK capital markets in a generation. And we've seen that reform touch all aspects of the capital markets. So we've seen the listing rules be rewritten. They went live in July this year. We've seen changes to the corporate governance regime, changes coming down the line to the stewardship regime. We've seen changes to research coverage. The government's launched a review into pensions capital. So, collectively, an enormously holistic reform process for the capital markets in the UK.
You mentioned obviously a lot of reforms there. How do you see these reforms positively impacting the trading and investing landscape?
Well, I think in retail inclusion sort of runs through all of these changes almost like a stick of rock.
Yeah.
It comes up time and time again in different ways through the different reforms. And fundamentally, what it's trying to do is to provide greater access to retail investors to regulated asset classes. I think we feel that the safest place for retail investors is alongside institutional investors, that actually sort of separating them often doesn't actually lead to good outcomes for them. And so you can see that thread run through a lot of those reforms. There's then a broader reform package that's going on. So the FCA have launched Financial Advice Guidance Boundary Review, which looks at whether or not greater access could be provided to financial advice in the UK. The government have announced changes to pension schemes, pot for life. So in other words, the idea that you can move a pensions pot with you as you go through different employers. So that hopefully you've got a better sense of what's in it and you take more ownership over it. So it's been great to see just how holistic all these reforms are, both from a capital markets perspective, but actually from a broader policy perspective in terms of getting the individual investor more empowered to make these decisions.
And if we look at that trend of retail inclusion across capital markets, where do you feel that trend will continue to go? And also, why does it matter? Why is it important for retail to be included in capital markets?
Yeah, I think it's critical. We're asking the population in the UK to increasingly take more responsibility for their own financial future.
Yeah.
And the days of defined benefit schemes where you were guaranteed a certain pension and actually how the pension was invested wasn't really your concern. It was the concern of your employer. Those days for the vast majority of the population are long behind us now. Now the population is serving into defined contribution schemes where what they get out is essentially what they put in and how it's invested and therefore the returns that are generated. All people are investing into ISAs. And again, they need to make decisions about how that money is invested. And so if we're going to ask people to take this responsibility for their own financial future, it's essential that we give them the tools and the education and the access in order to properly discharge that responsibility. And that, I think, is at the heart of why you're seeing all of these reforms going through.
I think you've mentioned a great deal of changes there, and obviously there's lots more to come. If you could be pushed to pick one particular area that most excites you, is there one particular area?
A lot of the changes I've been talking about are still in train, so they will come to fruition through the first half of next year. So I hope to see retail inclusion continue to grow through those policies that are not yet implemented, but will be implemented. We think there's quite a big opportunity on the fixed income side. At the moment, it's very easy to buy a share on the London Stock Exchange. It's very difficult for a retail investor to buy a bond. That doesn't make sense to us. Last time we checked, bonds were higher up the capital table than equity, therefore theoretically safer. And so there have been discussions, and the FCA have spoken publicly about whether or not greater retail inclusion in fixed income markets would be a positive thing. We're very supportive of that. And then we're quite excited by seeing more retail investors trading directly onto the exchange as well. And we've been doing what we can to make sure that is as frictionless and as cost effective as it possibly can be through a whole range of packages that we've announced and ones that will be coming out in the future. The UK is also launching the world's first regulated crossover market between public markets and private markets. So that will allow companies to join the exchange and have their shares traded as a private company periodically, but not be subject to the public markets requirements in between those windows. That's a hugely exciting launch that we're looking forward to seeing next year. And so, when you take all of that together, we think it's a pretty exciting time for retail investors in the UK.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really exciting. Well, look, thank you for being here today and taking the time to talk.
Thank you again for having me.